City County Board of Supervisors to order for a budget work session. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Hipp? Here. Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. McGlynn?
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Here.
All present.
Okay, board discussions. We are back to the budget.
I have no question.
My understanding was that you wanted to review debt service and CIP today, and if you had any additional questions. So,
all right. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board.
Good evening.
Stevens. First, I just wanted to start off by providing, again, a brief overview of where we are in our fiscal year 20 budget cycle. Tonight is our 6th public meeting on the budget. The first meeting was held back in January when we kicked things off with our pre-budget public hearing. And we are scheduled to adopt the budget at our last meeting, which is scheduled for May the 14th. Okay, so moving into the capital fund and the debt financing portions of the budget. Before we take a deep dive into the numbers, it's important to note that a government's credit rating can have a big impact on its ability to borrow, specifically related to the interest rate. The county is AAA rated from all 3 credit agencies. We received our AAA from Fitch and Standard & Poor's back in 2010, and we received our AAA from Moody's in 2015. All 3 of those agencies reaffirmed the rating when we had them on site back in November 2018 for our borrowing. There are not many localities nationwide that have that distinction, and there's even fewer in the state of Virginia. So it's something we're obviously very proud of, but more importantly, it's also something that we manage very closely to make sure that as we're making decisions, we can ensure we continue to hold that distinction. The county utilizes a 5-year capital plan, which includes both county and school projects. As I've mentioned before, the goal is that the revenues and the expenditures balance, and here again they do for all 5 years. I also wanted to mention we do not borrow money for every project. We have several projects that we use our current general fund dollars to cover. We also do receive some grants specifically for public safety and some of the fire apparatus, and then also for some of our stormwater projects. And we refer to those fundings as our pay-as-you-go projects. Considerations for new debt are run through all of our ratios, because again, here we want to make sure that we're staying within the constraints of our fiscal policies, and those fiscal policies are based on best practices and recommendations from our financial consultant and the credit rating agencies themselves. Of the 5-year plan, the first year, which is fiscal year 20, is appropriated. The remaining 4 years are provided so we can see what's in the pipeline. That pipeline is a snapshot in time. Therefore, the future years are revisited every year so that new developments, change in priorities, any mandates, all of those things can be considered. And we also have to revisit the funding sources and those projections to make sure the affordability is still in place. I wanted to mention that those red arrows are there to point to the proposed new borrowings and the related projects that those financings would cover. So specifically on the school side, we would issue bonds to cover the high school expansions, that's all 3 high schools, and for a potential new elementary school. In public safety, we would borrow to cover the cost of a new fire station, both the design and the construction, and also 2 pieces of fire apparatus. I believe it's a pumper and a medic unit that would also be used at that new fire station. So in total, over the next 5 years, we would issue about $69.4 million in new debt, but only after paying down older debt that provides us with the capacity to do that. And we'll discuss that next on the debt slides. So here we've tried to present our debt service in 2 ways. The first is to look at where we currently are. So in the green, we're showing the funding source, which the money comes from our general fund. The first purple area, the debt payment / current, shows where we are today, fiscal year 2019, based on what we currently have outstanding. The green line is really where we focus. That's what we call our capacity. And what that's doing is subtracting your transfer from the general fund in the green area from your total in that purple area. And the difference is capacity. Positive numbers are good, negative numbers are not. The next area, the second purple area, is where we would be after we borrow that new $69.4 million in debt that would fund the school projects and the fire station. And again, zeroing in on the green capacity line, you can see we're positive, with one exception, 2023. We have a couple of ways we could address that. First, as you can see in 2024, it's positive again. So that's considered a temporary. The other consideration is these are all based on estimates. So when we were looking at that $69.4 million in borrowing, we had to assume an interest rate. We've assumed 4%. That's high compared to what we currently pay, but we want to allow some capacity. So again, that negative, it's $100,000, may or may not happen. If it does, we have reserves to cover that. The other option would be to increase the transfer from the general fund. So you can see our debt has increased, but our assumption has been the transfer from the general fund has stayed the same. So that's how we look at that. So on the previous slide, you can see again by the end of 2024, we started to get tight in our capacity. So now we're looking on this slide into the next 5 years. Here from 2025 to 2029, again, we've shown where we currently stand in terms of our debt and where we would be after the $69.4 million in proposed borrowings. You'll note in fiscal year 2027, we begin to have some decent sized capacity again. And this would be a factor in the upcoming capital budgets when we start receiving those requests for those out years. We do also need to consider the impact of those future CIP projects, and more importantly, how to pay for the ongoing operating impact of those projects. So I've mentioned the opening of a 6th fire station. That would also require ongoing personnel expenses and supplies. The same would be true for the high school expansions and a new elementary school. For the fire station, the majority of those incremental costs would be additional personnel to staff the fire station. And we've already started building those costs into the budget. So when the station opens, we'll have a trained staff in place, and the operations component of that project has already been built into the budget. Now that the plan does include the high school expansions and possibly a new elementary school, we would need to begin our work with the school division to quantify what that operating impact would be, and then start identifying the strategies on how those costs would be covered, including the timeline when the schools and the expansions are expected to be done.
And that's not in there as of right now.
Correct. That's really it for my remarks. Take any questions you may have, or if you want to look at any of the other areas in more detail.
So one of the things that I noticed in some of the materials was that this year's budget calls for us to reduce the contribution, is that right, to debt service from the operating budget, but replace that with the 942 money? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that has to do with, I'm sorry. Just gonna miss
The sheet here.
that. Oh, yeah. That, I said, oh, I didn't need that.
Extras.
Did you do it?
No, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I had asked them to do this up because this is sort of an expansion of what was in Section A. And my concern was, we've got $492,000 for school operations last year and this year, which was the only recurring item, which I think we were trying to get built into the regular budget starting following biennium. But here we've taken additional $1 million and put into a CIP. in addition to the 1.3 that we're setting aside. And I think the thing that concerns me a little bit, I know that all of these things we're on a 2-year cycle once they're all done. And going forward, all of this money has been basically just rolled right into the CIP, which may be the smart way for us to do it because we've got major expenditures coming up, and it becomes sort of a pay-as-you-go. But I'm always concerned about, making sure that we keep that money for those one-time or long-term projects. That seems to make a lot more sense to me. And I know that when you have the money, the projects will be there because they're always out there. They always need to be funded. I think their challenge next year is going to be going back and looking and making sure that we are, and we need to give pretty good guidance as to how we want to see that go forward and how what the trade-offs are, as opposed to expending the money now on some of these things to help decrease our reliance on borrowing later on. What I don't want to do is get into a trap where we're using it to pay debt service because we are, getting maybe too far ahead of the curve. But there's a lot coming at us in the next 5 years. But I thank you for dividing that out because I was having a hard time tracking the individual things. Where it's coming, where it's going.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering, it seems to me we've got a lot of moving wheels in all of this. There are some sort of big costs that we think are out there. We don't know what the cost is going to be for water, for instance. It's somewhere out in the distance, but probably it's certainly beyond the 5-year plan. Right. And I thought we had a fairly aggressive plan for reducing current indebtedness. Seems like it's coming down at a fairly good rate. No?
Well, why don't you head back one slide? When you look at the capacity number, you can see where if we didn't have any more borrowings, we would have that, you would have that paying down of the debt. Mm-hmm. It's with a plan of almost $70 million of new borrowing that it becomes more even. So yes, we were paying down debt, but with these potential projects coming on board, then you're basically replacing some of that debt.
What's our current debt outstanding? So
I think it's
that's exactly
about 140 million.
140 million.
It started this year at 137.
That's a pretty good guess.
It was pretty good. Mm-hmm. 38. And so even though we borrowed some money, this year we also retired them. So that's on page F12.
Page 17 has a summary of all of the outstanding borrowings as well.
E17.
A17.
Yeah, and so what I'm looking at here, this plan does sort of build in though the borrowing that's out there, and it's assuming that our debt payments stay where they are, right? And the debt payments, as I say, they looked like they were staying fairly constant, but it was swapping out general fund contribution for 942 money. Is that right?
No, we're not using 942 money for debt service.
No.
Yeah, it's all in the capital. Okay, so
it's just a straight contribution to capital expenditures.
Yes. So
is that where this? It felt to me like there was a swap out going on somewhere. Is there a contribution to capital? is reduced this year?
Yes.
Yes, that might be what that you see it in total. We just separated out the 942 money so that you could see how much money was going over, how much of the money from the general fund was associated with that.
Right.
So
I just wanted to get a little clarity on that then. So if we were taking money that we were contributing from the operating budget, putting into capital expenditures, and now we're doing that with the 942 money, what's happening with
the way that this budget is set up is that, if you recall, last year we identified the uses, that for the one-time uses for the 942 money.
Right.
And so this budget keeps that going. Okay, that same plan is basically, so there was no swap, that was going out. And then if you look at your future years.
Okay, all right.
And then your future years, when you look at CIP, and let me see what page that's on. That's going to be on page D3. Okay. In last year's CIP, fiscal years 21 through 23 did not have any 942 money allocated. Okay, so what we've done is we've assumed that we will be getting 942 money continuously through that time, and it has been allocated to future capital projects based on the requests that had come in.
Okay.
So
This for this year, though, the difference between this year and last year is that there's a little over $1 million for school CIP in this year. That was used for other things last year, correct? Like I think we had the fire department. We did all the fire department training and people, everything last year.
And police.
Well, we did police. One-time cost. But we did the police in both times. I think we have police this time, but I think the fire was all done last year. Is that correct?
there was some additional, like the comp plan was another one-time cost from last year. So there was different uses.
Okay, so those,
but it was all one time.
But those are uses that were last year that are not this year. That's where that money comes from. That goes into that $1 million for
correct.
CIP.
Okay. And a kind of global question, if you will. I know you always try to make very conservative estimates about future revenues, right? And so real estate assessment looks pretty flat to me. And is that based on any kind of actual tracking of what's happening with real estate assessments, or is that just based on a kind of desire to
we have over the years, over the past few years, and this is on page G1, we do a projected 5-year operating budget. And our general overall assessments is in a reassessment year, we anticipate getting about 3% more in revenues. Last couple of reassessments, after it stopped falling, then we had a small little bump. And then the last reassessment, the reassessment generated less than a 1% change. I think we're anticipating that this next go around, it may be at the 1% or a little bit more. So we might, but it's still relatively flat, not growing the way that it used to.
Right.
But we do, in the reassessment years, are at least anticipating that there should be.
We didn't fall as badly as some other areas of the state did, but they seem to be coming back more strongly. So. Okay. Part of the reason I'm asking this is because I anticipate we're going to have to have a serious discussion about our level of school funding, especially focused around the compensation issue and the like next year. And so
I had one other question on page A14. At the bottom of the page, you talk about projected fund balance beginning and end of year. And it looks like the FY19 adopted, which is what we're currently in right now, actually drew down the fund balance by about a little under $3 million. Is that correct? And then they projected going forward for this year, it's to stay about the same.
Yeah.
Now this is all funds.
All funds.
Okay, and so this would include your CIP.
Okay, but
Okay.
this is the fund balance of all funds.
That's correct.
Okay,
And I know we use.
and I know when we draw down like that, sometimes is that related to CIP or is that?
Yes, and we use tourism fund balance for the synthetic field replacement.
Okay.
That was $1.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when it comes to your project funds like that, the rating agencies understand that. They
Okay.
know that there are years when you build it up, you're putting the money away, the pay as you go,
Yep.
and then it comes back down.
Okay.
They do tend to focus more on your operating.
On the
fund-
operating fund balance.
Operating fund balance is that they want to make sure that you're not adopting budgets that appropriate fund balance for ongoing
Okay.
expenditures, which
Okay.
Yes.
But the using it for the capital was much more acceptable to them on the rating agencies. standpoint.
yes, particularly with our level, with your fiscal policy of the 5% of annual revenues going over to CIP, they understand that you're not spending that 5%
Yeah.
every single year. You're putting the money away, and there's some years when you're spending more, and some years when you're spending less.
And I was just going to add to, this does include JCSA, and just like with our capital plan, they do the same thing where they will build up money, and then they'll have a particular project
Project
that's more
will spend.
expensive, and they'll
Okay.
draw down as well.
Okay. All right.
Well, I had a question in regards to the medians, and I apologize for bringing it up at the last minute, but I know there's been some concern about the upkeep of the median, so I wondered if you could go into a little bit about what are we supplementing for VDOT, and what struck me was yesterday I was driving out on 199, and there's a very obvious dividing line between us and York. And also on Monticello last week, the grass was about knee deep, which I'm concerned as we get into this tourism season. I know it's been very rainy, but I don't know how much VDOT is mowing and what is the difference? How much is York supplementing for VDOT, et cetera?
Well, I did ask, I appreciate the question earlier. Ms. Larson at least expressed that concern. I told her I'd at least put together what we're doing so you can see where we are. And I think we're doing a lot. It may not be enough. And that's one of those things I want to make sure you understand where we are. So Jason had put together some information that would show you VDOT, where we do supplement VDOT's mowing. So instead of them mowing X number of times a year, they mow more because we pay. And so we pay them and they do their mowing. And I do know Rossi Carroll had shared that they were a little behind in getting their contracts out. He thought he was going to get that caught up, but it still takes some time to get it caught up. And then we have some landscape areas that Jason will show that we're maintaining by contract. And I would tell you, driving back, I rode 199 back from York County into James City County. Right at the James City County sign, there's a landscaped area that looked pretty good. Then there's a median area in between that VDOT's mowing that looks worse. And then you get back into a landscaped area that we're maintaining that looks better. And so it's some of those things of timing and having different mowing schedules. You know, if we mow ours today and VDOT doesn't come until 2 weeks, and then we mow ours, and so some of that is coordinating maybe better of the mowings and trying to figure out, can we do that? And if Jason will, I don't know if his stuff will come up, technology sometimes gets us, but you are allocating, I think, close to $200,000 currently per year for additional mowings in a lot of James City County, not just 199. There are areas along Monticello, I believe Jamestown Road, and I at least asked Jason to try to sort of orient us and carry us through that. So turn it over to Jason and see what other kind of.
Great, thanks, Scott. So what you are seeing on the screen is VDOT's mowing schedule. You'll notice that there are some highlighted areas, and these are the extra mowings that James City County pays for. And this is what comes out of the tourism dollars. It's about $75,000 that we have budgeted. We actually pay about $69,000, so we have a little bit of wiggle room if we need to amend some areas. So VDOT does really 4 mowings for us throughout the year, and this is essentially a majority of routes 199, and then the secondary routes, Monticello, Ironbound, Long Hill, sort of all those other roads as well. And then we pay for an additional 3 mowings and then 2 litter cleanups in the spring as well. So this is what they do on their section. I'm going to close this.
Any questions on that before he moves off of that? Well,
So are you saying that they came in June? Oh, sorry. So June they came of 2019. They came in,
No, this is the schedule for this year.
oh yeah, sorry. Oh gosh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we do.
We have last year's by any
It's very similar. So we have them do it right around the LPGA. We have them come about a month later, and then we pick up an additional one in the summer, and then at the end of the summer. So we've tried to put them around some of the bigger tourism times. I think when we try to get into when they actually mowed, this is the problem with the mowing schedule is if it rains once at the beginning of the year, you're off for the rest of the summer. So if, we had a really rainy spring this time, if they were supposed to do it in, March for their first mowing and that got pushed 2 weeks, then sort of everything gets pushed down and they get backed up. I know, Ms. Sadler, you've run into that at the top end of the county because they really are doing the whole county.
Yeah, I mean, I guess too, I thought it was more often than once a month. Once a month is not a whole lot in a climate such as ours, except in August when everything dies because it's so hot and we don't have.
Let me bring up the map for what the county does.
Okay.
And can you at some point send this schedule to us? Because we get asked about this quite a bit.
And so when you say the county does it, Jason?
No, that was VDOT. So what I just showed you was VDOT.
Yeah.
And we supplement their contractor for those highlighted ones, the extra 3 mowings.
We pay for extra mowing.
So we just pay for, we're not out there mowing.
No. So what I'm going to show you now, excuse me, this is what the areas that James City County maintains, and it's just the areas in red. And we have a contract where we pay for 14 mowings for all of these areas. I think there are a total of like 20 maps. It's about 50 acres. It's about $125,000 a year. So
that's separate than what we
That's
just saw.
separate. And so when we go out and we've paid a contractor to mow this portion of 199, this is with the intersection of 199 and Route 60.
Okay.
It's just the areas in red. So when we go to the next one, a little further down, over the overpass with Long Hill Road, it's really anywhere where we have plantings, where the county has taken over maintenance from VDOT because we wanted it to look nicer, we wanted it to look a little different. This is behind the Midlands. There is a sound wall, and we have some additional landscaping in there to help buffer it. So we've taken over that chunk of it. This is 199 in Monticello. You'll notice all the exit ramps are the things that we maintain, but we do it through a contract, right? So,
Now, let me ask you, because the area's red, one of the problems we've had is the median in the middle there.
You're hitting exactly what I was just going to say. So there are areas that the county works with VDOT to trade. So we are currently working with VDOT right now to see if there is an area that they would take over for us, and we could take over the Monticello area in the medians in this area as well. But it has to be sort of an equitable trade. So that's the flexibility we have. So we are currently working on that piece. And what I would suggest is if there are other areas that you would like to see additional resources go into, let's identify them specifically, because it might be something where we don't have to add money to the budget. We might be able to work on these trade scenarios.
Okay. What about things like mulching and that type of thing? Is that something we have with the contractor you're talking about?
For the areas where we have landscape plans, yes.
So twice a year we get mulch, or?
I don't know the amount of mulch. We can look into that.
Okay. So,
Are there some areas we could replace weedy grass for shrubbery maybe that would
require James City County to take over the maintenance.
Okay.
We'd have to work on an agreement with VDOT, and we would take over that section, essentially.
That's going to cost you more than cutting grass. I mean, it looks better, but it's going to cost you more with the plants and maintaining that and keeping the weeds out of it.
Yeah, and again, I have all the maps of the areas we control. It's probably not worth going through all of them. I will note that it's not just 199. We also have Route 60 up in the Anderson's Corner area in Toano next to the school. We planted trees, and then Ironbound Road we took over when we did the widening for some of the bike improvements over there as well.
And if it's helpful to you, we could assemble the map so you can see something 11 by 17 that would be 199 or it would be Jamestown. Not, to give you an idea, because when you look at them like this, it's a little hard to say, well, how close is that to the next area we're maintaining? And there are some areas that are reasonably close together. And then there's some others that if you took over the distance between them, it's a lot. And I mean, I think cost-wise, you might spend a little bit to connect two areas. Coming in from York County, for instance, we have a small area. There's a small area that VDOT's mowing. There's another area that we're maintaining. They're never going to look the same because the mowing cycles are always going to be different.
Yeah.
Maybe we pick that up at some cost, but if you try to do all of 199, it's significant in terms of cost.
Yeah.
And it's trading off. Is it worth that, or do we spend more time on maybe some of those median areas that I know I see, I think many of you have seen as well.
Yeah.
And if we can trade that with VDOT, I think that's better long term to those that are paying taxes and
I think
fees.
the ones in our more urban areas, like along Monticello, when you got the median in that area, it really looks bad. I think people sort of expect 199 or 60, maybe it just hadn't been mowed or whatever, but
I don't know, because I mean, I agree. Monticello looked awful last week.
we did. Well,
But
and
when you're coming in as a tourist,
Yeah.
and when you see a significant difference in the look, I think is what made me sort of take a look. But one thing I mentioned when I'd gone to Lynchburg, I guess a year or so ago, their medians are beautiful, but they're sponsored. So it'll say sponsored by Publix or whatever.
Right.
And
not to put them on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. We'd love to sponsor our median. But, I realize that comes with people maintaining, and so nothing's perfect. But, I do wish we could go, not to add one more thing onto somebody's plate, but I think beautification is important, and especially as we're trying to do this, we've got this tourism initiative now that we're working on, and certainly something that we could also talk about at the Tourism Council. But I just wanted to see where we were in terms of beautification that way.
Well, even up at my end, that is an entranceway into the county.
Yeah.
And trying to make some of the cut throughs across 60 or 30 even, if that grass is this high, it starts to become an issue of what you can see coming because it's thick. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that concerns me is the safety aspect of grass getting to be this high. So that's, a lot of people get off at 227 to come into the county, and if it looks a little uncapped, it gets concerning sometimes.
Yeah. So I appreciate the effort that went into the presentation today, and just if you could just keep us updated.
Yeah, and just be thinking about when we talk about the medians, are you talking about new plantings versus cutting grass? I think that helps us budget, right? Because we have to do the landscape design and the landscape purchase, and then we can take over the maintenance and put it in that contract versus just having VDOT work under their existing contract.
So question, some of the small medians that would be, say, for example, right there where the Wendy's is at Monticello, is that us? Is that VDOT? Who does that?
I believe that's VDOT at the moment. Yeah.
And a lot of the concrete medians that have grass growing out of them, we're not maintaining many of those, are we, Jason? I think that's all VDOT, but they still need
We've got one on News Road right up by the Rite Aid there and I've seen weeds that come up in the cracks. It's solid. It's just all concrete, but the weeds will be knee high, and nobody comes along and trims it down or whatever. The other thing I've noticed is that although VDOT may be mowing the medians on Monticello, there are curbs that you can't see, that nobody edges. And essentially, they cut it down short, but it's grown over into the road.
Sometimes there's people in dogs
which I think is looks really bad. I don't know if it's a safety hazard or not, but it just looks awful. So every time I drive around, I think the one that really gets me most of all is that from News Road up to Ironbound on Monticello.
Yeah.
Come on, Mama.
I don't want to get into VDOT's business, but I did wonder if it wasn't cheaper to do shrubbery with mulch. I mean, you can lay down weed barriers to, sure, occasional weed will pop up, but I mean, other than just grass. And is that, if we had like adopt a spot or something, and then they had to go out there once a year to do a shrubbery, because you don't want anything there's plantings that aren't going to grow very tall, so it's not going to impact traffic flow or anything. But
I think the weed eating around beds, the maintaining the bed is where the landscape folks have the price go up. So VDOT has essentially said, if you want that, that's fine. You just have to take over the maintenance of that, which is what we would be getting into. I mean, that's certainly something that we can investigate, but I do not get the opinion or the feeling that VDOT's going to.
Yeah.
The grass is going to be cheaper than the beds. And if you look over there by York County where Lowe's and all those, I'm traveling through there all the time, and they've just stripped that whole thing. And they have trees and everything and replanting it because it got to a certain point where they were dying and they were having issues with them. And it was beautiful what they put in there. I mean, it looked great for all those years, but it gets to a point where, after a while you can only trim it with so much, and the next thing you're ripping it out and replacing it.
Yeah.
But the job they do over there, when you're coming off, and I agree, when you're coming off the interstate, and you come through York County, which I hate to say, and it looks really nice. You come into James City County, it's kind of barren. And, I'm not saying we need to plant every part of the median, but what we may want to do is grass and divide with the planting and grass with the planting. And you got to remember, too, on knowing the firehouse side of it as well, the more trees, even if they're smaller trees that are growing by our roadways, the more ice storms and all that, we're having to clean up as well. So there's a it's
and we can't lose sight of the fact that the amount of roadway in James City County versus York County is enormously different.
It is.
York County has very little 199 in areas that can be visible to the tourist, and so I think they've basically taken the strategy that we'll just pour everything into these couple of spots that really look good. We have a lot of places where the grass goes out a ways, and you're struggling to kind of keep up with all that. So.
And I know when we last year, the year before, we contracted it out. We changed our team, I think, to do schools, and we contract together. And they're doing a good job, but it's not the job our team was doing. Our team was keeping those. I got to say it. Our team was keeping it impeccable down through there. Everything we were taking care of in house was. And, that they were, and not saying the other company isn't doing a good job. They're doing what they're being paid for to get done. But I can say that our team in James City County in-house was doing a hell of a good job keeping that up.
Absolutely. We love having them available for the sports complex and the schools and some of the other revenue generating areas.
I miss them in the other parts.
Yeah, but we appreciate that.
Who does VDOT contract? Do they contract with the jail?
No, it's out first.
No,
I used to see on 199. I used to see.
But those are the localities that we're getting work through.
Okay.
You can get X amount. We haven't pushed that further to see if we can get any more of those, because I know we had it up to the point where we got as much as we could get at one time, and we couldn't get any more.
But the basic issues are you have to have people to supervise and transport. Plus, you have to have the inmates who are
work release.
You can get out on the
streets
without Public.
Yeah, we absolutely still use them on an as-needed basis.
Right.
On some of the locations that don't need sort of the constant upkeep, like some of these meetings.
And Ms. Flores, on the topic, and based on board discussion, I think there's certainly interest in us keeping on top and being aware, and let us sort of give you information that shows it a little better so you can really see it. And then if there's spots, we've heard a few locations in terms of News Road, the median in front of Wendy's, those kinds of things. We can try to see at least quantify what that might cost. But if you add more to it, if we can't just trade off, it does come with some more expense in terms of paying contractors, paying BDOT for additional mowings. I think either will do all we are willing to pay for it, so we just got to balance what we think is.
And the medium in front of Colonial Heritage, they take care of that. They keep that up, keep the trees and keep it trimmed. So they keep,
very pretty.
which is nice if we can get some more of that, like you were saying. To do it in the middle of in front of their places.
Yeah, it does become challenging when you're doing it in front of a particular business.
It is.
Because then other businesses are going to say, well, you can do it for them, why can't you do it for us?
Yeah.
So they're doing it
That's
for
why I
themselves.
kind of like the sponsor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More than welcome to come out and join them.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Any other questions on the budget? Michael?
Nope. I'm good.
I had one more for you guys. It was on page C79. And I'm sure we had to plan for VRS multiplier and reserve for compensation. Was that dropped because we adopted that earlier? I remember we adopted that for changing the VRS.
That's been spread now throughout the budget in those individual areas.
Okay.
This is what was in the plan.
That was
once it was approved. And proposed
because I remember when we did the approval, that's what I thought it would be, but I just wanted to verify that it just, it had been dispersed where it needed to be done.
You got it.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
I'm good.
Okay.
Can I just ask one question about the school funding? I noticed that the city had an increase that was slightly larger than our percentage increase, despite the fact that the formula is working more in that direction. What's that a function of?
I'm sorry, I missed it. Is the schools or the shared services with the schools?
On page C80. You can see that our percentage change is 2.5% versus their 2.7%.
And that's based on the school contract, okay?
So that's because it's a 3-year average for the school contract?
It's 3-year average, and so each year we look at the difference in the number of students, and then it's a rolling 3-year average.
Okay. So their share actually increased a little bit. The expectation for their share.
Their share has decreased. Right?
So what I'm wondering is, again,
Share increase slightly.
why their percentage increase is higher than ours.
Oh, their percentage increase versus the funding split. I was looking at the funding split.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I assume that the funding split would have been driving that.
Right. Well, and with the way that the financial summary is shown, some of it is where this is the proposed based on the superintendent's budget, okay, and we put our number in and we don't adjust the others, okay, because we don't know how they're going to give a new total.
Might not be their number.
That might not be their number
Gotcha.
when all is said and done, because it is assuming that the schools will have a $141 million budget. They may not. They may cut spending and lower that amount. So and then that will change that distribution. I believe that we should have all the information by the time that the adopted budget is published, and we'll be able to update that page with all the figures that everybody has adopted.
Okay. Thank you.
We are still carrying the lion's share.
All right.
Okay.
Any more questions from the budget?
We did also provide the errata sheet, which incorporated the changes from the proposed budget to where we are today. know if you had any questions or if you'd like me to go through those changes.
Would you please?
As a recap,
If you got them.
certainly. So the total proposed budget has remained the same at $211,825,000. The changes incorporated a reduction in the contribution to the regional jail that came down by about $92,000. We had 2 increases to the budget. The first was adding 2 paralegal positions to the Commonwealth Attorney's area. That would be effective January 1st, so a mid-year effective date. The cost of that was $49,243. In addition, the supplement provided to the General Register, there was a request to increase that from $5,000 to $8,000, so an additional $3,000. That additional $3,000 with the benefits component added to it is $3,760. So that was added to the budget. Then basically the difference between the reduction to the jail and those 2 personnel changes was about $39,000 to the good. And since that wasn't allocated anywhere specific, it's been added to the contingency. And that brought us back in balance.
And that those 2 paralegals in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, those are as a result of state mandates.
That's correct.
Right. And it will mean going forward essentially $100,000 a year going.
Annualized.
Right.
That's correct. And that is the net amount after the city of Williamsburg's contribution as well.
Okay. And there's no state funding at all for those positions?
Not at this time.
That surprises
All
you.
right. Well, I mean, they're important positions, obviously, because of the new technology and body cams and so forth. But at the same time, if the state's mandating it, you'd think.
That's the problem, you thought.
Yeah, right. You'd think. Right. Would you mind just taking a minute to remind us and maybe let any of the public interested in knowing about how the contributions to outside agencies are determined? Because I know there is a process, and it's one of the areas where I think we are often contacted about why didn't our group get the money they had requested and so forth. And sometimes, especially for groups that haven't previously requested, it seems like a kind of black box. We don't really know what's going on internally. I know I had a very nice visit with ARC about a request they put in, and apparently Williamsburg and York funded their request. We didn't. So maybe just a little bit of information about how we go about that process.
Okay. I'll do it. I was going to say, this is my final question? My final answer? So particularly for the community services agencies, our social services department goes through them and evaluates the request, determines whether the agency provides a service that either would otherwise fall on the localities to do, or if they're doing it and it actually helps to maybe reduce cases or what have you in social services. What happened in this particular year was there were recommendations for funding. However, based on the revenue constraints for this year, we had actually gone back to the departments and said, we really need you to come back to what the planned amount was. And so since this was an exception year budget, any new requests from outside agencies were not funded because it was coming back to whatever the plan amount was. So that's not to say that they should not apply again, particularly in the first year of a 2-year budget is when, if it is a service that the social services recommends that it is, valued and it provides savings to taxpayers, for overall cost of service, then it can be something that is more easily worked in the first year of a 2-year budget. But when there's the exception year and there was no new funding, outside agencies were really held to the same standard that all the departments were.
Yeah, we did come in a little bit lower than the plan. this year?
In this particular area or?
Overall, and I guess I'm looking at the C-78.
On C-78,
$20,000
yes,
worth.
on C-78.
Right.
So some
But
areas.
some areas ate that up.
Yes, yeah, there was, Go Virginia, there, it was planned for, but was not included.
Right.
So, and there are different, there's the community services agencies, and then there's others that are business and or areas where we pay based on a funding formula because it's a regional entity. So.
I'll stop.
No more?
I'll ask one more.
Good.
On C-79, we have money set aside for economic development incentives. I'm just curious as to whether we're actually spending any of that money.
We are. I believe we have 3 active incentives that we're paying annually. They're submitted to the Finance Department from Economic Development. There's an underlying agreement for each of those. They have to submit their incremental revenues to the Commissioner of Revenue, the Treasurer. They validate that information, and then it's sent back to the county for payment.
And so the increase is actually related to new incentives or additional incentives coming online.
Correct.
Thanks. Okay. No more? Stop looking. Stop looking for that. Stop looking. I'll send you an email about it.
So is everyone
To share it.
happy with the errata sheet and as going forward for the approval of the budget? Okay. So I think we have consensus moving forward. I will look for we don't have any other business, I guess, no closed session. I look for a motion to adjourn until 5 p.m. on May 14th, 2019 for a regular meeting.
Well, we should probably give a round of applause to Sue.
I thought we were but you're right. Let's do that on camera.
Yeah. The long goodbye is almost over. So, thank you. It's hard to believe this is your last meeting. But
You can let her make the motion to adjourn.
true.
Then it may not be legal.
So moved.
Okay, we have motions.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Eisen.
Aye.